Hello. Welcome back to Life OnTrak, where we challenge traditional norms and explore unconventional topics that impact our financial well being. In today's episode, we're diving deep into taboo money conversations, topics often deemed too sensitive to discuss openly. Let's discover why these discussions are crucial and how they can empower us to navigate our financial journeys more confidently. The first topic we're going to talk about is a rough one: financial infidelity. Let's start with the question: why do people hide money matters from their partners?
I think a lot of times when it comes to money, we will put a connotation on some connection that it ties into who I am, right? So if especially with the way we show it in an economy, I drive this car, I live in this neighborhood, that's a status symbol, right? And
Mhm.
so when there's financial infidelity, which this is why it makes all the headlines, I'm not going to state any names or anything, but when the wealthy do things that you would think, well, you have all the money in the world. Why would you do something like that? Right? It kind of symbolizes that, hey, it doesn't solve everything. And so I think sometimes infidelity happens because we don't want to face what really the underlying issue is, especially if we never got to know ourselves to begin with, then I can use money sometimes to hide a secret too.
Yourself. Yeah. What about you, Carolee?
I think sometimes it's a thing of fear as
Mm,
well. And if you have money problems, well, it comes to the fact that the money problems become generational and you are afraid to reveal that. Being honest is the best thing to be, especially in a relationship. And if you're not honest, you're hiding it.
yeah.
So it becomes internal.
Such a big conversation. I'm hearing feedback again. I think so. What I'm hearing is secrets and fear. And then what I would add to that is judgment. I think that often people will hide their money matters from their partners because they don't want the judgment from their partners, right? Using my own relationship as an example, we're very different. I am the spender, I am the risk taker, and my partner is the conservative one. He likes lots of savings, right? And so we look at money very differently. He looks at money as security, and I look at money as a tool, which is very different, right? And so sometimes I might spend money more frivolous. Well, sometimes, more a lot of the time, I might spend money more frivolously than he would, right? But that doesn't mean I'm making necessarily bad decisions. But if I was to be very open about where my money was going, then he might come to me with a lot of judgment, and I don't wanna have that conversation, right? To back up and just share a little bit about how we have our money structured, we pay our joint bills out of a joint account, but our income comes into our own personal accounts. And so that allows us the autonomy to manage our own money because we are on different ends of the spectrum. And then with our combined bills, the mortgage, the car insurance, utilities, that kind of thing, all of that gets dumped in. We both contribute to a joint account, and then that pays those joint expenses. But then that leaves whatever's left for us to do what we want to do with it, right? With the caveat of we're making decisions that aren't going to hurt the other one, right? Because if I went out and bought a $100,000 car and then used up all of my discretionary funds, that could potentially hurt him if we needed to jointly go in to do something together financially. So I think for me, it comes down to judgment. I don't want to feel the judgment of someone. I may already be judging myself. Maybe it was a frivolous purchase and I don't want to hear what he has to say about it.
That's right. That's what, exactly. I don't want to. I want you to tell me about my spending at Sephora. Go ahead,
Right.
me, and watch me play out Meryl Streep, the devil wears Prada. Head, right? I mean, when you think about it, what does judgment get us? It gets us
Mhm.
nothing, shame, and then more art.
Guilt.
Yes, guilt.
Guilt.
The family reunion of bad emotion, right?
Yep.
Shame and guilt. And you know what, too? Sometimes I think, of course, in relationships, like you said, I may go out and buy a car and he may go out and do something else. Sometimes we forget the pressures on our jobs are different. However, I relieve my pressure through how I spend may have a tie into how hard I feel as if I've worked for it. Therefore, I deserve it. if you weren't in that office with me, if you didn't have to retype the emails 85 times to keep you out of HR, then you don't understand my pain. So why, if I had to do that just to earn it, to go out and buy that $100,000 car, like, can't
Should
tell
be
me
able to spend it, right?
I will read you like the Supreme Court shut it down. Say next subject, please. But yeah, obviously that's a little bit of a stronghold for me, and I think I like what you're saying too. I think it's a lot of the reason that people don't share accounts as much anymore. That's a question that we tend to get. I get a lot in my personal life is, should I merge accounts with my financial partner? We're getting married or
Right.
in a relationship, so we should do that, right? And I'm like, it depends. Just like you said, how much autonomy do you want?
Yeah.
But I think if you are in a relationship, there should be some respect in communicating if you want to go purchase a car. Like, what do you think? But if you go out and buy a car, you're going to feel a little bad because you're in that relationship and you didn't tell the other significant other person that I just bought a $14,000 car. In fact, I went through that with Eric. He got a little bit of money from his mom when she passed. He went and bought a Mustang, $14,000 cash, didn't tell me. Yes, I was furious. 'Cause I said,
You have two children.
yes, I said, all you had to do was sit down and communicate with me and talk to me. And I would tell you yes or no.
Yeah. But the risk was that no was an option.
Right. Right.
For you,
Yeah.
for you to respond.
Yeah.
So
Didn't tell me. Drove
yeah.
blasting his music.
He, did he? Like, I want to know so much more because now I'm invested. Like, did you scream? Was it like, did you throw anything?
No, because in my nature, I have a lot of patience.
Yeah.
But I was very upset. I don't think I talked to him for 3 or 4 days. And I put it inside me, the anger.
Yep. You
So-
internalized it. Yep.
Internalized it. That was the most ridiculous thing you could have done because there was no need for it. All he had to do was communicate with me about it.
Right.
Yeah. So I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because you say Mustang, and for a lot of couples, it's something physical that is trying to kind of nurse what they may have felt that they didn't get, especially in
Mhm.
childhood. If I was teased for being the poor one, or I had the generic shoes. I remember I got teased relentlessly in junior high because I didn't have Nikes, and they called me like a really bad name all year long until like I could afford and beg my mom to finally get me Nikes. And so sometimes I think I've carried that into adulthood that no, I'm going to have the best of the best, give my kids the best of the best because I don't want to relive it. Then when it gets in the way, like you said, of logical decision making, and it gets in the way of my wins, of what's important to my
Mhm.
right now. Is it this Mustang, or is
Mhm.
it the Mustang, or is it their college education? Whatever that may be, right? That's where we hit pivot point of like, wait a minute, hold on.
What are some other long-term effects from the financial infidelity from relationships, and how can they be mitigated?
I think it spreads. I
Mm.
think it spreads. It's the start, and infidelity, financial infidelity is just a symptom of something bigger anyway. So how can I uncomfortably, but within a manageable range, sit with whatever the underlying issue is? Or otherwise, what I have seen with a lot of people is it started with financial infidelity, and then that was no longer enough, or I maxed out how much I could do at some point. Financial infidelity, you're going to hit the ceiling anyway. So then I found other coping mechanisms. And the reality was I needed to cope with whatever was the underlying issue. So I think the long term effects are it spread. And the best way to deal with it is figure out where is this coming from? Like I kind of do this thing internally where uncomfortable feelings come up and instead of like, oh, I don't want to think about that and just push it away and not think about it. I actually imagine in my mind, I like to go to museums. And so I noticed something about the best art at the museum. It is roped off. They do not let everybody just go and put their fingers on it. You're not going to go and just touch the Mona Lisa. You're not just going to go
Yeah.
to the statue
Mhm.
of David. And so sometimes I just tell myself, look at it like a fine piece of art. You wouldn't walk around a fine piece of art and say, "Ugh, that sucks, that's ugly, that's this." You wonder, you're curious, let me look at it from this angle. What does it look like from this? And we don't let anybody else touch it. And then that kind of takes the negative connotation of,
Yeah.
I don't want to hold this uncomfortable feeling to, let me examine this from a curious place. And if I can go there and hold that uncomfortable feeling and examine it, then I can come up with a better solution, give myself some discipline, hopefully around a new practice if it's needed. And I always find when I do that, and when I come out and I journal, I always journal at the end, like, oh, it actually wasn't that bad. But if I would have kept it where it was, it would have been
Right.
circling in my brain.
Right. And it would have grown and into this thing that now you've got all these thoughts around it and they're probably
Mhm.
negative. Yeah. I really love that.
Mhm.
I really love that. It's a really great way to look at it to where you're pulling back a lot and you're looking at it objectively instead of attaching yourself to it and owning it and then sitting with it. And what I found similar to you is when you're able or force yourself to sit with those uncomfortable feelings, you do often learn that they're not as heavy as they were at first, right? You just have to let that emotion drop away from it and
Mhm.
then you can deal with it, and then you can understand it, and then you can look at it from that curious I know I'm repeating what you said, and I apologize. But then you can look at it from that curious perspective, and you can understand it and transcend it versus judging it within yourself, right?
Exactly. I love the
Yeah.
phrase transcend.
Yeah. Transcend.
All trauma, whether it be financial or anything else, can be transcended. It can be transformed, but it's going to take doing a little bit of work.
All right, I'm gonna transcend us. I'm gonna transition us into another taboo topic. I'm gonna talk about family entitlement and money. I know. Why do family members sometimes feel entitled to each other's money?
I'm going to give it to you, Carolee, because I have a relative that really gets on my nerves and he's about to be red to pill. So you go for it first before I get kicked out of my family.
I I think because family members feel entitled at times,
Huh?
like you owe them something,
Huh?
and let's say you make more money than they do. They sometimes envy you, even though they're family. And I've learned to say no. I've learned to say no.
Yep.
And that's for everything, not loaning money, which I've been very fortunate that really hasn't been an issue. Other things in life, I'm just no.
Yeah.
I,
I think from what I've noticed, I think a lot of times this happens, especially with parents and children, right? Just because you birth a child doesn't mean that, I mean, of course, you're obligated to take care of them. I'm not saying that you're not, but for them to, especially as they grow up and they're old enough to make smaller and until they're larger financial decisions, doesn't mean your money is theirs. Oh, and I know, and I don't have children for the record. Let me just say that out loud. But watching I have 17 nieces and nephews between my sisters and my best friends, and I feel like I've had this really honor role in a lot of kids getting raised. And I also have been able to look at it from a fairly I mean, I love my kids, right? But from a fairly objective perspective because I didn't birth them. And I would say, like, just because it's my responsibility to take care of you doesn't mean I have to spoil you. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. If I do spoil you, then you don't learn the value of a dollar and what it feels like to earn it, right? The other thing I would say about this is I think a lot of us set ourselves up for failure. I think that in a lot of cases, and I'm calling myself out here, in a lot of cases, if there is a family member who may have had, whether it's now or in the past or just in general, a lot more money than other family members, I think they feel an obligation to help the others, even if the others aren't asking. And so when you start that pattern, it's really hard to stop. I think I found myself in that situation. I would help family and it where they wouldn't ask for it, it became almost expected, right? And I can only blame myself for that. And so I started instead of giving them money and then resenting them for it because it created this whole cycle, I started telling them, if I don't have it, you can't have it. And so so I stopped just giving it to them. First and foremost, that was my lesson, money 101. But I still had it in some cases. And so if family would come to me and ask for some help and I could afford to give it to them, then I would give it to them. I wouldn't call it a loan. And then what I would tell my family is, if you give it back to me, then you can borrow it again. Or I shouldn't say borrow, forgive me. Then you can have it again, right? Because it's not a loan. I'm not expecting it back. If you want to keep this going, then you'll build my trust, right? But I'm not a bank where that's just never ending. And when I switched gears that way, it it created a much more respectful relationship. The entitlement went away on both sides. Even the entitlement that I gave myself went away. I was no longer putting myself in a position where I was putting myself in a position to help them, right? And then by turning the conversation around, I was also creating a more symbiotic relationship between all of us. And I think that helped a lot.
Yeah, I
Right.
love you. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think when you do it that way, they actually feel better as well when you want to give it at your time. Because my granddaughter, she's a starving student. And before she would ask for it, and I would give it to her, but then started doing the same thing. I started taking my time, that time of the month, and I willingly just sent it to her. I do it every month at a different time when I feel
When
that
you
it's
can, right?
when I can, yeah, and not being forced to do it. Not that I would never do anything for her, but I just felt that it made her feel better, made me feel better, and my grandson too. When it came to his birthdays, he always waits. He never asks for anything. But then he came down in March and he said, "Grandma, will you take me shopping for my birthday?" And it was like, of course, because he was sweet. And so we went on a little shopping spree and he was so thankful and it made me feel good.
Yep.
It wasn't expected.
Right.
Hmm.
I've had it happen under so many different contexts, and thank you, Carol Lee, for that. Because like, my eyes are tearing up because those times with my grandmother and doing just that. I was a starving student, she helped me pay for tuition, and we'd go shopping together, and those are just great and beautiful
Hmm.
memories, and it was such a blessing, and I thought we'd have forever to do that, and
Hmm.
cut short really quickly and suddenly. So yeah, I also think sometimes there can be power dynamics.
Mm.
One thing I've seen on one side of my family, so I have this really wonderful grandmother, like I mentioned. She would help me financially because my dad was the black sheep. And there were only 3 grandchildren, and other 2 grandchildren that would get worlds and worlds of things, and she saw that I was being treated differently. My family was very conservative, and I came from people that were not married, and so the punishment that should have gone to my parents kind of being like, "Oh, she's an illegitimate one," and my grandmother was like, "Well, I'm gonna level the playing field." Hence, what they get, she gets. And
Yeah.
former in-laws, a lot of little family politics. So I think that's part of the reason that happened. But I also, on the other side, I had a family that does a lot of conspicuous consumption. You buy it, I'm gonna buy it, and it's gonna be bigger. And I think the main dynamic, underlying theme at play on that side of the family is if we started out all from kind of the same DNA, grandmother, grandfather, mom, dad, grandparent, but you played a different set of cards than I did, right? So for that side of the family, I was the first to go to college. And whenever I would say when I was growing up that I was going to college, it was always met with just extreme, "No, you're not. You're gonna have a kid. You're going to be a mother young, just like everybody else, just like every one of us." I was like, "No, I'm really gonna go to college." And it was like and they would laugh, they would taunt, and I'm talking about grown adults. And so now that I've done it, a lot of them are like, "You played a different set of cards, but you're still in our line of DNA." And so sometimes we can still be a little testy about what do you have versus I have, your house versus my house, your car versus my
Oh,
car.
I see. Yep.
And I'm like, you're not mad at me over my house. You're not mad at me over my car. You're not mad at me over anything else. You're mad because I am your parents' granddaughter and I took the same exact thing they told you and played it to my advantage. That's it. That's what you're mad about. And sometimes I think that's what brings up the uncomfortable with family and money is, well, if you did it,
Mm.
I'm from the same DNA line. I could have done it too, but I didn't make those decisions. And now I can actually physically see what the potential outcome could have been, and I can't reverse time. So I'm going to lash out at you, right?
I'm hearing in both of these topics, I'm hearing a lot of internalized emotions that are showing up in our lives in different ways because society doesn't teach us how to be honest with ourselves. Society teaches us that we're supposed to lash out at others, like you said, or hide things, or feel guilty, or feel shame. Or I wish society did a better job at teaching us how to be honest with ourselves so that these things don't fester in families or friends or in any setting.
True connection, developing true connection without anything supporting it.
Yeah.
We don't have to connect because you have a even though that truck is real interesting, right?
Yeah.
We can just connect, you know, make each other feel bad. A Honda Accord is gonna get you to the same destination as a Tesla.
My car is, I think, it's a 2011. This is 2000, it's 13 years old. And sometimes when those BMWs, I've had, I think, 5 or 6 BMWs in my life. I currently drive an Audi again, it's paid off. But these brand new cars drive past me and I'm like, I'd still rather be driving my paid off car than
Then the new ones, right?
It's
what?
tempting though.
Is that age? I don't know.
Oh, that's
Wisdom.
It's
Don't
wi-
get me wrong. If I could afford a new car, and I, anyways, I guess that's a whole nother conversation. Needs and wants.
yeah.
All right. Have a third forbidden topic for you guys. Money and politics. I know politics are hot on the or trending, especially this being an election year. But let's talk about the financial side of it. Have you ever felt judged or alienated because of how your financial choices align or clash with your political views? Let me ask another question. Why is discussing money in the context of politics considered taboo? And how can we have more open, productive conversations about it?
I just ended a friendship over this. And it wasn't money, but well, kind of. The friend I'm originally from California, from the Bay Area, and of course, very liberal views, very
Mhm.
different experience. And I moved. I had to move because, like many, I was priced out and I wanted something different. So I moved. And the assumption of a lot of people around me that the move also meant an agreement with the politics was astonishing. Because I was like, they were like, well, you're governor of this. And like, girl, I speak to him. I don't even know where he is. I see him during hurricane season. We're lucky.
If you're lucky. Yep. You show up on
And
TV for a minute.
like it's funny how you hear it from different locations. And you're just like when people try to tell me about I posted when Kamala became VP. I
Yeah.
am from the Bay Area, and when Kamala became VP, being a girl from San Francisco, oh, I had some pride and I posted
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my gosh, how could you? And she this and she that. And I'm like, but you don't know what her journey was. Like, I saw what she went through in the Bay Area, and
Yep.
that was no joke. And so, like, I have had those type of clashes, and just because we may identify with one party or over another, I should say, doesn't mean we agree with everything.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not following cult here.
Right.
I'm just deciding how to
Right.
vote. Like, I mean, I can have a bigger debate with you over Sephora versus Ulta than I
Amen, sister.
like, literally, whether once I read that debate, like, what's better?
Yeah.
And but in the tie and the to politics and the way it kinda pulled something out of people, and I had a friend who had a very particular political issue that she was an advocate for. She never asked me, did I agree with it? She just assumed that I did because I was from California, and we had never discussed it.
Yeah.
But she kept telling me, "You need to move from that particular state because they don't agree with this." And I was like, "But you've never asked if I agree with it. It's not something I could advocate for because I am not living the experience, and I don't walk in other people's shoes or try to tell somebody they can't do something because of this." But it became such a thing that we had to end the friendship because she was so tied to the political views and tied into what I should be because where I was from, that it was alienating ourselves from the friendship, though that became the topic of conversation in every
Yeah.
we talk. Why are you still there? You need to move back here. It is right. And I'm like, politics wasn't the reason, but it became,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Had nothing
became
to do with politics.
right. It became the centerpiece of a friendship that I was like, "This is weird." When we lived in the same place, we never once talked about this stuff. And now we can't even be friends, and I never knew you had this type of, I don't know, vitriol is the right
Oh,
word?
yeah.
She was coming at me hard, and I was like, "I'm sorry, we gotta." I don't do, like, religion and politics are they're
I was just going to say, you never want to mix the two. And you look at money and politics, okay, it goes hand in a sense because of the cost, the rise. So everyone's frantic. They can barely make it right now in California. The prices of the food, of course, they're complaining and they're going through a lot. And, but moving out of state, sometimes it's the grass is not always greener on the other side. And for you, it's been great. And you shouldn't and we all should have our own opinions without criticism. We should be able to voice our opinions. But when you start talking about politics,
People get charged. Yeah.
yeah, people get all, oh my goodness. And then they start judging you
Mhm.
for your beliefs.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be that way. We should all come together as a common ground.
Mhm.
And again, money goes hand in hand because of the cost that just they're not the president isn't the one raising the prices. Let's put it that way.
So some will say that.
Almost say
Right.
that.
Right. Right. Ah,
I mean, that
it's
is
just
true.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wish some people would have stayed up during econ because I'm like, it was never the government's job to ensure full employment. They tried and they gave up and they let it go to the private sector. And I try to like say now to people, who's the group that's not complaining too much about where their finances are? Investors. Stock market's doing pretty good. Consumers are feeling it.
The consumers.
Yeah. Well, when you look at revenues and profit margins of companies over the last 2 years and how they are really hiking up inflation and saying, well, I'm Coke and Pepsi's doing it, or I'm this and the other brand is doing, my competitor's doing it, I might as well. That's what's leading to inflation. And the Fed uh, I mean, they can use their tools, but it doesn't mean that everybody reacts overnight. It typically does take about 4 years to actually see the outcome. And when I used to teach in macroeconomics, we had a chapter on fiscal policy. And because it involves politics in some type of way, you have to go over presidents and stuff. Joke one time, I said Ronald Reagan, and the whole class was like, who? I was like, Ronald Reagan. And they were like, who's that? I had to go to whitehouse.gov, bring up his picture, and they sat there and looked at it like they had no idea who that was. And they were like, I wasn't born until like 1994. God bless you. So that's my
My
running joke
goodness.
about where this generation. But
It doesn't affect me. I don't care.
right, exactly. Like if it's not Boys to Men, they didn't know who it was. And I was like, okay. But what I noticed when I taught that chapter is when I took off whoever the president was and I just looked at what the economic policy was at the time, it is so much more to do with timing than it is to do with the policies of any president. Because a lot of their economic policies, no matter the party, a lot of the policies aren't different. It's just timing and who it's catered to at the time. There's one president in particular, because of politics, I will not state his name, but he gets looked at as like being one of the greatest. And I'm like, you look at what his policies were, and they were the policies of his predecessor. And you're like, predecessor was of a different political party, but he's in the right place at the right time. Because
interesting.
That's
one,
interesting.
oh yeah, one particular in basketball, they have this sixth man award. And in the economy, there is the sixth man, and it is technology. And when that came to play and it comes off the bench and it enters the economy and it shifts the way we buy, it shifts the way we look at products, it shifts how we get information, that changed the game. And that's what you see actually in the data and the numbers. You're like, he didn't technically do anything different than his predecessor, but he's in the right place where technology comes off the bench and he gets credited for it. However, really, he did nothing different. But it's so interesting when you compare the data and look at it objectively and say, let me take the face off what happened here. And I'm like, oh, they're really not different in terms of policies. It's just, were you in the right place at the right time? Some presidents are just, unfortunately, I mean, we can name a couple that economically it sucks. You're a good guy. You're just in the wrong place
Wrong
at
time.
the time. Yeah.
Interesting. How do we, knowing that financial policies and political agendas can very much affect our personal finances, how can we stay informed and proactive? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that for me, that's what I was gonna say. I just look at, okay, what's the policy? Take off the face and how is it different than the present? And then I'm like, oh, it's
Yeah.
kind of the same.
Carolee had mentioned or something earlier to the effect of, just lost my train of thought.
No worries. Because I
You're fine. We can cut this all out. What are some ways that financial policies and political agendas directly impact our personal finances, and how can we stay informed and proactive? Politics and religion, I think, are very entwined this way. I think that we could do better at understanding it takes all of us to make this world go round. I think that when it comes to politics, standing your ground is important and having a voice is important, but you have to also understand that so does everybody else. There's always going to be ebbs and flows in politics and in policies and in parties. And I think that we have gotten to such extremes that we have lost sight of a common goal. And I honestly don't know what it's gonna take to bring us back. I think that there seems to be a running theme today of judgment and shame and all these internalized feelings, and I think maybe that is where we go. Maybe we stop thinking that our views are the center of the universe and everyone has to think like we do. If everyone thought like we do, this planet would look very different, right? The beauty of where we're at is literally because we are all so different and we bring such beauty with ourselves into whatever society we're in. And I'm talking about the internal beauty of how we think and what our values are and all of that. I think that if we remain on such an extreme, then we lose sight of the bigger picture, right? Because now we are egotistical, we are self-centered, we're being narcissistic, right? And when you are living in all of those states, you're not giving the rest of everyone else an opportunity to have their voice, right? And what makes you more important than anyone else? What makes me more important than you guys? I'm not. We are all equally as important and we all have a voice. And I think that we should all be given opportunity to share it like we are right now. But that requires work. I'll be honest, my father and I have very different political views. And what we have learned is, and maybe here's the proactive part, what we have learned is there are certain topics that we just can't talk about. We can't find, we can't find an area of politics that we agree on. And so we just agree to love each other and leave that topic alone. And maybe that's enough. I don't know. I feel like I'm being a bit of a hypocrite by saying, no, you have to give everyone else a voice, but then saying I can't do that for my dad. But I also understand that it takes two to tango, right? It takes two. What I can't give you a voice, but you don't give me a voice, that's not fair. And so if I'm not met with the same respect, then we can't have a conversation. And from my perspective, we're not there. I love my dad, but we haven't always had the best relationship. And so I think sometimes for me, it comes down to trust. I don't trust that he's going to hear me. And maybe the reverse is true as well, right? But again, that goes back to internalizing self-acceptance and learning how to have that self-confidence and not just giving yourself permission to have your voice, but also giving others permission to have their voice and understanding that it may not agree with you. In fact, it might be so polar opposite that it's going to make you angry, right? But this world wouldn't be what it is if we were all the same. We're supposed to be different. And I think that's what people forget.
I agree.
What I think is funny, and me, I always have to provide a little comic relief here. But I also think sometimes with politics, we have to think about what went in it, right? And
Mm.
hopefully I can state some names here because otherwise saying the story isn't going to make sense. But you remember when Al Gore and George W. Bush go up against each other? There's this Chad thing going on. Supreme Court has to rule, and George Bush has won the election, George W. And everybody's like, he stole the election. I wish somebody would have whispered in my ear, oh, wait till you see what's coming up. This is nothing. That's first. And I remember thinking kind of along those lines, it was so highly charged at that time. Oh, poor Al Gore. Oh my
Uh-huh.
goodness, and all of that, right? And so I think I kind of went in with a bias for George W. because of the highly politicized charge that was. And then, like I said, I started teaching economics, looking at policies, and like it's not bad, but I had a bias towards him. But then I started to notice that every time he's around Michelle, he looks like he wants to risk it all. And I'm like, you know what? Hold on. And I watched his dad's funeral. Huh? And he comes up and he's shaking all the other president's hands, but he can't wait to get to Michelle. And he passes her something, and that became like all the funny thing. Like, what did he Michelle?
Yeah.
Well, I guess she says due to protocol, they have to sit next to each other as former president and the way that the seating is selected, she always has to sit next to him. And so she says she always asks him for candy when they're sitting next to each other. And I'm like, I wondered why you guys always look cozy at the after president event. And so now I'm like, I didn't like you at first, but you giving Michelle candy
Oh,
to Michelle. And now that's the requirement of my new friendships. If you're not willing to bring me a piece of candy at your daddy's funeral, I don't want it.
I don't. Go sit next to me.
Right. Don't.
Oh,
Loves him some Michelle. And I'm sorry that I judged.
Oh,
That's an all right dude. I mean, it was nothing detrimental. Look, you can be that right now. Somebody like, no, you don't understand. Like, but look what we have been through ever since.
ever since.
That was light work. For
Mm.
me. And whether we agree or disagree, it's just been hard to digest it all.
Yeah.
Right?
On
No
both
matter,
sides.
yeah. I don't want anybody losing their life at work. Right? So I want all people, no matter where you are, to be safe. We all deserve, whether we're in school, whether we're at work, we all deserve to be safe and secure. And so,
Agree.
yeah. So, yeah, if we could start treating everybody like those two have a relationship, like, here's some work, candy.
Yeah.
Here. Here's
Then we
candy.
got this, right?
Hey, go to work today.
Uh,
Here's a
um,
candy.
Today, we challenge the notion that certain financial topics are off limits. By openly discussing financial infidelity, family entitlement, and the intersection of money and politics, we've shed light on important aspects of personal finance that can significantly impact our financial well-being. Join us for future episodes as we continue to empower ourselves through real-life stories and actionable insights. Remember, embracing unconventional conversations is key to taking control of our financial futures. Stay tuned for more thought-provoking discussions from Life on Track. We'll be discussing how race affects finances next. I know. Until then, keep the conversation going. Stay committed to your financial goals. See you soon.